Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Meanahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called British vs. Pirates, and it's from the designer Apollo Randall. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. There will be a link up in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Those links will take you to the page. You can find out more information and hopefully consider backing the project. Now, British vs. Pirates is a game for up to 6 players, although you can play it with as few as 2 as well. Depending on the number of players are going to take control of at least 1 or 2 ships and 1 or 2 captains, and your goal is very simple. You're trying to take out the opposing enemy fleet, just sink them all, and be the last faction with ships left floating out at sea. Of course, it's not quite that simple. Each captain and each ship has its own different stats and strengths and weaknesses that you need to take advantage of. There are skill cards that you have to use very strategically throughout the course of the game. It's not just a matter of, I move my ship on the ocean. You need to take command of the fleet and look at the wind patterns and really use them strategically as well. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype version of the game. So what you see in this version may change in the final version, just keep that in mind. Then we're going to come back, we'll discuss it further. British vs. Pirates is a competitive game for 2 to 6 players. If you play with more than 2 players, they split into teams as evenly as possible. Players take control of the 2 titular factions. The goal is very simple: sink all of the opposing ships. Whenever one faction loses all of its ships, the game ends, and the last faction floating is the winner. The first thing you do to set up the game is make the map out of sea tiles. The number you use is dependent on the number of players, and some of them have larger or smaller island structures. But you'll always use the wind vane sea tile in the middle of the map and place the actual wind vane mini on it. Each faction will have at least 2 ships and 2 captains. For the captains, place a D6 on the morale section flipped to the indicated number, which is also the maximum morale allowed. Each captain has a grapple and repel stat, and they get one of 2 bonuses indicated on the bottom of the card, depending on what type of ship they sail. Speaking of that, there are several different kinds of ships: frigates, sloops, xebecs, etc. Under its name will be its particular type of cannon and its performance rating based on distance. Under that is the speed of the ship, along with its pivoting score. Lastly are the different structural sections of the ship and their defense ratings: bow, starboard, stern, port, and structure. Place a D6 on each of these as well, set to the indicated number, which is also the maximum rating. Once each faction has chosen their ship card, they take the actual ship minis and set them on their edge of the map. There are multiple ship models, each one corresponding to the different categories of ship. Each faction has a set of skill cards, representing upgrades to your ships and temporary emergency boosts. They're broken down by color. Green is speed, yellow is defense, red is attack, and blue is special. Every card also has a morale requirement to play. On your turn, the first thing you do is increase your crew morale by 1 up to its maximum. Then, draw back up to 3 skill cards. Before doing so, you can discard first in order to draw more new ones. Each ship is allowed 2 types of actions per turn: movement and attack. Movement involves moving a captain's ship out on the map, and this can be done before or after your attacking action, if any. Every ship has 6 different speeds, depending on your direction in relation to the wind, which you can tell by the direction of the wind vane, which might get moved because of skill cards. A ship must always be moving forward, but it can also pivot to a different direction, which is the other navigation score of note. A ship can either pivot, move, or move pivot, but remember that changing direction can affect your relation to the wind. Next, to perform actions, you must make sure you have line of sight, measured from the center of your hexagon to the center of your opponent's. The actual firing lines of your ship are on the sides, going out in a cone. If there are enemies on both sides and you have line of sight, you can attack all targetable enemies with the same action. The part of the ships that are damaged are the part that are facing your ship. For example, if the bow is in the firing line, that's what gets hit. One other thing you need to be aware of is the strength and limitation of your cannons. The first line of the cannon stats tells you how many spaces away you can target. The next line in the same column will tell you how many dice you roll for that distance. And the last line is accuracy, which is the number you need to meet or beat on the dice to have a successful attack. When you receive damage in the game, rotate down the d6 for the appropriate section. If the d6 can't go down any further, you need to rotate down the structure die instead. If that die ever goes down to 0, the ship is sunk. Therefore, it's better to have your other defenses up as much as possible. It is also possible to perform a boarding action in this game. Both ships must be next to each other on the map. You may still use skill cards to help out. Both players will roll a d12 and add it to their crew morale in either grapple or repel score. If the attacking player's total is equal or greater than the opposing total, then the opponent's morale becomes 1 and their ship receives 1 structural damage. Keep playing until one faction is completely sunk. That is British versus Pirates. Well, of course, the first thing you notice about British versus Pirates is the appearance of the game, because even just in the prototype version that I have, which, I've played a lot of prototypes and people don't put a ton of effort into them, even just in the prototype version I have, you can tell there's a lot of love and care, and it just is a very pleasant-looking game. Now imagine what the final version will look like as well, with individual miniatures for every single type of ship for both factions, and high quality artwork for all the ship and captain cards and skill cards and so on. And it's very interesting too, because the game does not have a very big footprint. It just looking at it, it seems more expansive because of the high quality of the components. But nevertheless, it still takes up only like half a table. It's not, even if you played with the maximum player count, you're not looking at this huge sprawling monstrosity that you have to worry about all these different chits and things to take care of. It's really one of the interesting things about the game is the fact that it has heavy strategic gameplay, and yet it's very fast to learn and very easy to learn, and it's not something that you're going to get buried in a ton of different components, which is not what I would be able to say for a lot of games that have a similar theme and a similar sort of mechanical weight to them. So that's very interesting in and of itself. And then when you break down into all the individual mechanisms of the game, again, it's simple, but there's depth there. The fact that you have the different parts of the ship that get attacked, that there's a very specific way that you have to attack the other ships, which makes logical and realistic sense. The cannons fire from the sides of the ship. So that makes it much more difficult than, say, your standard game where it's just like, okay, I point my miniature at the opponent and fire my whatever. In this case, you have to really plan it out so that you can not only be able to hit any kind of ship, but hit as many ships as you possibly can that hopefully are the enemies. And then taking advantage of the fact that the different parts of their ship can get hurt. So you might hurt their bow, but if their bow is at full health, so to speak, then what have you really accomplished? What you need to do is take out the structure of their ship, their hull, essentially. And if you're just hitting starboard and their starboard's at full, it's not going to do anything. You need to be, focusing fire, to use a D&D term, and hit them as hard as you possibly can over and over and over again in a certain spot in order to destroy them completely. And of course, again, in order to do that, you need to constantly be moving, constantly be pivoting, taking advantage of the direction the wind is going in, using the skill cards that can change the wind for you when you need to, but knowing that your opponent can do that as well in order to put the winds at their sails. So this is not a very static game. You are always moving. You are always looking for a strategic advantage to attack your opponent. And so the game is never slow. It's always active and always moving and always progressing forward. Just like how a ship can always only move forward. And you have to keep that in mind. It's not just like, oh, I take a 5-foot step and go in this direction. So it's a hex game. And so it has that extra layer of depth to it with the movement. Different island tiles with different structures you need to worry about. Again, the different captains and ships with their own strengths and weaknesses, the ships that they can pair up with. There's a different variety of pairings there. So with one captain, you might use a frigate this time in order to get them a grapple bonus. With the next game, you might use the same captain, but change the ship in order to get a repel bonus, which equals out to either attack or defense, essentially, for boarding parties. But this is another interesting thematic and realistic bit of the game as well. So lots of interesting things here. I think if you're a fan of pirate games, if you're a fan of strategic two-player combat-oriented games. If you like, let's say, Ameritrash games, but you want a little more complexity and depth to them, you don't want them to be quite so totally random. There is some randomness in this game, but it feels more strategic and has more depth than you would expect for that type of game. Definitely, if you fall into any of those categories, check this game out on Kickstarter. It's going on right now. You can follow the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Go to the page. Don't take my word for any of this. Find out more information on the page itself, and hopefully consider backing the project. That is British vs. Pirates from the designer Apollo Randall. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting all of our sponsors. Take care. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.